Let's talk about musical genres for a minute, because while you're proficient in a variety of styles, including rock, funk, R&B, reggae, etc., iTunes classifies you as a jazz musician. How would you classify yourself, or do you think it's even possible or important?
I'm a jazz musician, but I've gotten, forgive me, this is where the so-called ego comes in, but it isn't. If I recognize something, I'm not shy to say it, but I've become an extremely good, really good rocker, funker, blueser, jazzer, reader, sideman, not sideman, soloist, jazz, voice, bass player. The varieties of things, I'm a real kind of across the board, but the thing, if I had a choice as a leader, is jazz, and the jazz that I try to do is melodic and not typical of a bass guitar. So I would sort of describe myself as a jazz bass player at this point.
If you had to pick one of those. Well, I don't think it's egotistical for someone to say they're good at their job.
I agree with you.
And the other thing is, the beautiful thing about music is you don't really have to put it into words, because a musician's playing speaks for itself. So you can say, I'm a great funk bass player, and then stand up there and not be. Or you can play awesome funk bass and not say a word, and everybody in the room knows without you saying that you're a great funk bass player.
It's absolutely true. And there's an interesting attitude that goes on, and I consider it a false attitude. A lot of people have a kind of a general concept about how to behave in music. And I'll point out something. It's like if a musician, if I say, man, I sounded really good on this project, if this was printed or put into a magazine, without fail, some people write in and say, I was disgusted, I was shocked, I was overwhelmed. I feel like Jackie Mason here. I was disgusted, I was shocked. This guy said he's so good, I'm so upset, I'm so sick. You remember how Jackie Mason did his thing?
Yeah, he had a great voice.
And the truth is that's a stereotypical, nonsensical thing. I mean, what is wrong with a strutting musician, a Jaco Pastorius who said, I'm the baddest bass player in the world, a John Lennon who said the Beatles are the best freaking rock band that ever was, a Miles Davis who said, I'm the best freaking musician that ever was, Joe Zawinul, the Weather Report Joe Zawinul, who I'm the best we're the best freaking band. There is this prima donna false attitude that if a musician celebrates their own joy at their own musicianship, it's a negative, and that's nonsense. So I'm here to say that I'm darn well thrilled and happy with what I do as a bass player, but I practice all the time, so I'm not so thrilled that I think I'm that I'm all that.
Yeah, but all those people you just mentioned, including yourself, can back it up with some evidence. I think the Beatles can make a case for being the best band, Weather Report.
Of all time,
But what happens when you meet a guy in a club who goes, I'm the best lead singer ever, and has nothing to show to prove that?
Yeah, I'd even embrace him and say, good, bro. I'm so happy you really dug it. Because, I'm trying to go more the Dale Carnegie way of,
Well,
I don't wish to miff people off like I used to in the old days and stuff. And
actually, you make a good point, because John Lennon said they had that attitude before they actually were regarded as a huge band. I mean, he thought that not egotism, but that mindset that
right.
We just thought we were the greatest thing ever, helped them, instead of being all, real modest or real, gee, shucks, we're not that good. He was like, no, we're great. Let's go perform. Let's go record. We're great. And in that sense, yeah, you need to. How could you, win an Olympic medal or, be good at anything if you didn't have that confidence?
Oh, I so agree with you. And it's not an awful thing.
Oh, no.
And it's this fake sort of nonsensical
right.
musician. You got to be humble. I said, what? Humble? And Elvis Presley humble? I mean, Wilson Pickett's humble. James Brown, humble? I mean, you could be loving. I don't recall Lennon or any of these guys being rude in their exuberance of their artistry, but, I mean, get out of here, man. We're strutting peacocks here, man. We worked our asses off in order to become the musicians and the players, hopefully, that we wished to become.
Well, maybe the negativity, and I'm thinking of this just as we're talking about it, it could be that by elevating yourself and in the listener's mind, they're being, like, deflated somehow. Like, I can do this, and they're hearing, and you can't. Maybe it's their own inner insecurity. Yeah. Well, there are two terms I want to get your opinion about. The first is progressive, as in progressive rock and progressive jazz. What it means to me is if you're in a band like Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer or King Crimson or Rush, and you find yourself doing things musically that no one else is and cultivating a unique personal sound, then in essence you're making musical progress, hence the term progressive. And I know a lot of the projects you've worked on have been characterized that way. So how would you interpret the term progressive?
Sounds good to me. You know, I don't have a problem with terms, and I don't really even have a problem with pigeonholes. I don't even have a problem with stereotypes. You know, everything seems to, it's not a wrong thing to sort of generalize what something is or is not. Eddie Van Halen would be shocked if you didn't call him a rock musician.
So in some cases you do have to generalize. Just, I mean, in the record bins, back when there were record stores, they had to know if it was classical or if it was rock or if it was jazz. But what happens in the next term I want to talk about, you mentioned Pat Metheny. This is a term he apparently hates. The other term is fusion. You know, there comes times, in fact, I'm about to play another one of your tracks, and it has elements of rock and it has elements of jazz. The piano part sounds like jazz. The guitar soloing sounds like sophisticated rock. The bass and drums seem to lie somewhere in between. And because it's not either or, some people just go, fusion, you know.
Right.
So before we get your opinion about that, let's go ahead and play that track because it's pretty cool. That track was Just a Bofidus, and
yes.
It's from a 2006 CD you did called Aneurysms, a pun on aneurysms. Before we get to that question about fusion, you want to give us the personnel on that track, who was playing what?
I think it's Vinnie Colaiuta, Richard Drexler, Gavin Arnold on guitar, and Otmaro Ruiz on keyboards. And that was a name that my son mentioned when he was a little boy, and he wanted to go out one day. He says, "Hey, Dad, can we go out together, just the both of us?" And I laughed. I said, "That's great." I wrote it right down and called that tune "Just the Both of Us." It means nothing. It's just I've always enjoyed funny words and puns.
Yeah, we're gonna that's our next topic, but your spelling on it is Justibofidus.
Yeah, just the both of us.
Right. Well, what is
Sean Evan Berlin.
Do you think Chestabophatus is fusion, or do you think it's something else? Or do you think it matters?
Fusion sounds fine. It's even Latin. I have no problem with the term fusion. I have no problem with the term progressive rock. I've got no problem with stereotypes. I've got no problems with any of it because it's all based in some sort of common truth, you know.
Mm-hmm. You know, we talked about some of the humor in your titles. A lot of your song and album titles reflect your sense of humor. I want to run down some of my personal favorites real quick.
Go ahead.
We all know the song Don't Worry, Be Happy. You've got one called Don't Be Happy, Worry.
Right.
You took the title Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out and
Right.
adapted that into Everybody Knows You When You're Up and In.
Right.
Let people think about that one for a minute. Dave Liebman has played sax on your albums, so in his honor, you've got one called Liebman on a Jet Plane. Some of your titles are spelling jokes that have to be read to be appreciated. Like you've got one called Lean on Me, with lean spelled L-I-E-N, like a tax lien, lean on me.
Right, a lean on me.
Right. You've got one called Sob Story, with sob spelled S-A-A-B, like a car, sob story.
Right.
You know, aneurysms instead of aneurysms, making it a musical term. And got an album based on the phrase "in harm's way," but yours is "in harmony's way."
Right.
Good stuff. There are
I have
two.
a song, L-A-P-P, Lap Dance.
Yeah, lap dance with lap spelled L-A-P-P, making it a geographical thing. There are two titles I want to ask you about specifically, and one of them I'll backtrack to Gradually Going Tornado, the Bruford album. You contributed an instrumental called Joe Frazier. Why did you pick that title?
Because I'm a boxing fan. I played bass for him once in a studio, one of those New York dates that I was referring to earlier. And I love Joe Frazier. Deeply, deeply admire him.
Okay, well, Joe Frazier was a tribute. And tell me if this title is meant to be a tribute. Stung, McCartney'd, and Bruced.
It's my past tense for Sting, Paul McCartney, and Jack Bruce. So,
Right.
Yeah, I find lots of little humorous names and things. And I've gotten extremely good at it. I came up with a name the other day, Fascinating Arrhythmia. and I may write a song about it.
Well, all this comedy reminded me of some of my favorite music-related jokes. I'm going to tell a few of them right now. These are rhetorical questions, so I don't expect you to answer. So check this out. How do you know when there's a singer at your door? He can't find the key and he doesn't know when to come in.
Bada bing.
What do you throw to a drowning punk rocker?
What?
His amp. What do you call? I stepped on my own laugh there. I'm not a professional comedian. Can you tell? I like this one a lot. What do you call a country musician's girlfriend? A relative minor.
Oh, right. Oh, what?
What's the difference between a dog and a violinist?
What?
A dog knows when to stop scratching. How is a soprano saxophone like a lawsuit?
Oh.
Everyone's relieved when the case is closed.
Bada bing.
And finally, what's the ideal weight for a music critic?
What?
About 3 pounds, including the urn. Well, you mentioned starting out in the classical world. I'm going to play one of your tracks that's in that vein. It has a Latin title, which I believe is pronounced Ars Longa Vita Brevis. Is that right?
Correct.
It translates to Art is long, life is short.
That's right.
Before we play it, I have one more joke that I think is appropriate to the concept. A plane carrying the world's finest orchestra conductors crashes in a field. A reporter on the scene asks, who survived? An eyewitness says, Mozart.
Bada bing.
some really lovely interaction between the piano and the bass on that track, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to prove to the world that Jeff Berlin is in fact capable of playing quarter notes, even half notes when he wants to. Whole notes, let's not go crazy, but...
when I want to.
Let's talk about gear. You're an endorser of Mark bass amps, and what is it about their amps that sets them apart from the rest?
Oh, I'm the biggest Mark bass fan that maybe they have as an endorser. What sets them apart, very simply and very specifically, is tone. It's simply and specifically the outstanding inclusion in their construction. There is something in the tone that is astonishing. 15s make it for me because they have enough highs to sound crispy and they have enough lows to sound warm and deep. And I've kind of avoided 10s. You move from one speaker to another, or sometimes you make a career out of one sound. I prefer not to play 10s and prefer to play the 15s. And when Mark Bass contacted me, I had already been turning down endorsement offers for 10 years because I tried all their amps and I did try them when they offered it to me, but I couldn't get the tone. So it was very difficult for me, but I turned down money and endorsements and gear and ads and stuff. But I'm fairly an honest endorsee. If I use the product, it's because I really love it. I don't take use equipment for money. More to my probably financial situation, but I'm not that pragmatic. So they sent me an amp, and it was a 15, and the instant I heard it, I didn't even adjust the tone knobs. I ran to the computer and said, please let me endorse you.
Wow.
And the guy says, well, I'll build you anything. Marco Di Virgilis, any amp you want. I said, no, I want this. Just take the tweeter out. I prefer to have an amp without tweeters. I don't like the sound of tweeters. And I have what to this minute, to this second, is the finest bass amp I've ever heard. A generically superior, warm, tone, punchy, golden, astonishing amp. I've never been able to capture it quite that way in the studio yet. I'm looking to do that because the mics don't even represent the gloriousness of this amp live, the Jeff Berlin combo. They gave me my name, but they gave me the name for that. But it's originally, the 115, Mark bass.
Jeff Berlin,
I didn't want anything else.
Yeah, but Jeff Berlin amp sounds better than 10567 bass.
Yeah, I suppose. It does to my mother.
Got a little more
My
personality.
son's got an amp. Does
Now,
your son have an amp?
What year did you have this experience that you first played?
I'd say about 5 years ago. I got their amps 6 years ago. And let me be honest, there isn't a day that I plug into those amps and don't celebrate the tone that comes out of those systems.
Well, considering how long you've been playing, if by 5 years ago, it was 2007 or something, you'd have been playing a lot of equipment prior to that, so you would know what works.
I've been through it all in the sense that whenever I gigged, I would, if I toured, I would ask for equipment to be delivered. What do you want? Just send anything. And I tried basically all the amps. And let's be honest, all these amps that are built out there are great pieces. I mean, nobody makes a bad amp anymore. Nobody. They're all great. They're all well built. They're all suitable for playing by bass players of all styles and all kinds. But the one separate issue has always been tone. And it's the one thing that's eluded me and frustrated me deeply. I remember an amp, I won't mention the name. They were very popular, and they had sent several big, like their most modern amps. I could not make heads. I was on a gig with Jermaine Jackson, and before the gig I was trying these amps and testing and turning and pushing and popping and couldn't get a tone. I was so upset, and a couple of years later I heard from Marco, thank God, thank God, thank God.
What about the instrument you play in terms of your tone? Do you want to explain the difference between a passive and an active bass?
Well, an active bass has a preamp that boosts lows, mids, or highs. And again, for my ear, I dislike deeply active basses. And frankly, it's probably the norm. It's more as the common is for people to buy a bass guitar with a preamp, but I've never understood why, because you can get very good highs, mids, and lows out of an amp and out of a bass. But when you boost those signals, to my ear, they sound artificial. And as to the stereotypical kind of attitude about the humble, contrite musician and all, I've discovered that people have gravitated toward, or some people anyway, toward the active basses, and I don't know why anyone wants a bass with a battery in it. And you hear the sound, and it just sounds hard and unsweet. And maybe for the very hard music that they play, maybe the rock or certain things, but it's always been an unpleasant sound to me. I mean, people get an active bass, boost the highs, boost the lows, and then put a tweeter in it, and I go, it's awful. I mean, it's just terrible for me. So I preferred a passive bass, because a passive bass has a great range of sound possibilities if the pickups are good. And I always use Bartolini's. So I got the Dean guitars to make they call it Jeff Berlin again. I have another bass with my name, another product with my name on it. And you know how many basses I own?
I'm going to guess not many.
2. You know how many I owned before I got this new one? 1. I had one bass for 15 years. That's all I owned.
I want to bring it back to the musical genre of jazz, since as a band leader, that's your preferred style. And I want to bring it back to what I consider more pure jazz. In 2010, you did a CD called High Standards, and featuring your interpretations of some jazz standards. One of my favorite tracks on that CD is the classic bebop composition, Groovin' High, written by the late, great jazz trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie. Wouldn't you know it, I happen to have a Dizzy Gillespie joke. Promise it's the last joke of the session. Improbable as it may seem, a musician dies and goes to heaven. That's not the joke. That's just the setup. When he gets there, he sees a beautiful bandstand that's populated by all of the greatest deceased musicians in history. He spots Dizzy Gillespie and asks him what the gig is like. Diz replies, well, we get treated all right, and the food is good. And sensing a lack of enthusiasm, the musician asks, well, what's the problem? And Dizzy says, well, God's got this girlfriend who thinks she can sing.